Hi, we are the group 2 and today we are presenting about the stalking behavior comparison between mainland China and the United Kingdom. This is our agenda. First, we introduction about the stalking behavior, the stalking case in mainland and the stalking case in the UK, and case comparison and the offender characteristic. After that, we discussion about some treatment intervention and provide some suggestion. And after final is conclusion. So first, what is stalking behaviors? There is no universal definition for the word of stalking alone, and stalking can be interpreted as an unwanted attention and repeated, which are interrelated to the harassment and the intimidation. The offender following and monitoring the target victim will be 2 or more times. The stalkers is based on the Milan research. There are 5 types of stalkers. The rejected stalker, which is has to close relationship with the victim, and they are reverse and correct avenge or the rejection to the victim, and they are more characteristics self-centered and the jealous. And the resentful stalker, they are fear, humiliated that the relationship has ended. They are more verbally assert and want to powerful control about the victim. And the intimacy stalkers, they are seeking for the intimate relationship with the victim. So they are feel very lonely at the time. So they are mostly frankly phone calling and writing a letter. When the victim have some new relationship with the others, they feel jealous and become more violent. The incompetent suitors is kind of related with the intimacy stalkers, but little bit different is part of them. They are not seeking for the intimate relationship. They are looking for some just short-term sexual partners. So they are more inadequate social skills, and the time of the stalking time should be shorter than the intimacy stalkers. The predatory stalkers is seeking power and the sexual gratification, and they are surveillance to track. And there are mental health conditions also often appear to the offenders. Antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, this narcissistic personality disorder. And the rate for the stalking is about 1 in 5 women and 1 in 12 men in the United Kingdom, and about 1 in 10 women and 1 in 10 men in China. So this is the stalking case in mainland.
In August 2019, a murder case happened in Jiaxing, Zhejiang province, mainland China. In this case, ex-boyfriend stalked and killed his ex-girlfriend in the undergrad garage. The girl on the right is the victim Xu, who was only 20 years old when she was killed by her ex-boyfriend. And her ex-boyfriend Lu is a criminal. They kept a love relationship for half a year at the beginning of 2019. In the love relationship, Lu had chatted many times, so she proposed to break up. But Lu showed that he loved Xu deeply, so he proposed to get back together many times after breaking up. And they were all rejected, so he was killed, and he was only 25 years old when he committed the crime. According to the insiders, Lu chatted on her and participated in gambling problems many times during her love affair. After the relationship between them ended, Lu stalked and harassed Xu many times. After she blocked Lu's social media, Lu begged Xu's friend to send her whereabouts to herself and arrive at Xu's location with a knife. After failing to get back together, Lu dragged Xu to the undergrad garage and stabbed Xu in the neck with a knife, resulting in his death. Subsequently, Lu surrendered himself to the Public Security Bureau and was sentenced to the death in the jail.
Yeah, stalking case in the United Kingdom. The Alice Ruger stalking case, which happened in the United Kingdom on the October 12, 2016. 2016, Alice was 24 years old when she was murdered her ex-boyfriend. Offender Trayman Holly Dillon, a soldier serving with the two Scots at the Penny Creek and south of the Edinburgh, and he met Alice through the online. They are starting a relationship in 2016. When during the relationship, they are being critical of her appearance and want to control her life, and also her friends and family. The Dylan control her social media such as Facebook by changing the password. When the Alice want to end the relationship, after the relationship, the stalking activities begin. He keep calling and leave the voice message and text the email with the different phones, and acts as aggressive and threatening, and he treats Alice he will kill by himself, and also contact her family and friends, and also destroy Alice's new relationship, and repeatedly visit her release house and rang Alice's doorbell. How Alice Lucas died? Because he climbed into the Alice house through the window and picked up the kitchen knife and slashed her throat at least 6 times. Alice suffered 24 injuries, and Dillon was sentenced to 22 years in the prison.
When we look for the similarities between the cases, for both cases, there are male offenders and female victims who had previously dated. Everyone were in their 20s, and there were instances which the offender had cheated on a victim, and the victim had tried to leave this relationship. Both victims have been stalked similarly by getting many phone calls and being followed. And unfortunately, they're dead by similar means, which they were both stabbed. So according to previous research, these offenders were resentful stalkers and intimacy stalkers. When looking into the offender's characteristics, we do not find relevant signs of Lu being a psychopath, as he was resentful and confessed to the police after the murder. But as for Dylan, he fits the criteria for psychopathy, as he has used threats to release compromising photographs of his victim, and he said that he was not used to being denied what belonged to him, and he even tried to frame the victim for attacking him first, and he killed her by self-defense. And according to another research, these behaviors were known to fit for psychopathy, as they were manipulative, and this offender has a lack of anxiety and remorse, and he did not care for other people's feelings apart from his own. And as for the goal pursuit level, Lu's, his goals were simpler, as he was satisfied with just taking the victim's life. But Dylan's case was more complex, as he had not taken the victim's life the first chance that he had, and he continuously had been breaking in and out of her house, and even to one point he left chocolates and flowers at her house to demonstrate his obsession and possessiveness, to toy with her emotions. So one reason to suggest was that he was a soldier, and that according to previous research, soldiers value endurance and persistence, particularly in impossible goals. The reason that I stress on goals is that according to the relational goal pursuit theory, we have an assumption that all relationships satisfy desirable and feasible goals by human nature, and they were in a hierarchical structure, which the lower level ones are more easier to achieve than the higher level ones, but they're necessary before we move up. But should any case these goals be too unachievable, then the individual will be quite sad and afraid of it before they abandon it. On the left, there is an example of the hierarchy of goals, which I have wrote to, and for a relationship is that a more low order goal is that two people are together because they do not want to be lonely before they move up to develop common interests, and they've been happy because they have found each other and they share similar interests. And if we look into our case analysis, then Lu's hierarchy was less time-consuming and more straightforward, is that the ability to control the victim immediately has a linkage to his happiness. But for Dylan, his case was more time-consuming and more complex, is he's not only satisfied by having the victim's physical being, which is her life, but he also wished to manipulate her mental and her mind, which is also her feelings, and he aimed to manipulate her feelings and her life before he is satisfied.
In mainland China, in essence, it's still a male-dominated society, and the social states of men and women is still improving and changing. Therefore, to a large extent, men still retain a sense of self-ownership towards women who have had a relationship after breaking up, thinking that what they have done to their ex-girlfriends is a reasonable scope, and at the same time, women don't have a strong sense of self-protection in the relationship. Because of the education of harmless culture, they don't have a clear attitude towards stalking and fight back, which leads to this tragedy.
On the other hand, for the UK, which is more an individualist country, it values more personal characteristics and choices. So for stalking cases, more is focused on the harms of it to the individual. There is no official definition for stalking, as what matters or what harms an individual matters differently to each person. However, stalking is known to be analogous to harassment, and this problem is viewed very seriously to each person. Whereas comparatively to mainland China, more have to worry about the social stigma and effect to the general community as a whole.
In China, there is no clear checking law, and the simple checking is not illegal. However, if you repeatedly send obscene, insulting, threatening, and other information in the process of checking and interfere with the normal life of others, peeping, secretly talking pictures, eavesdropping, and spreading others' privacy, it's a violation of public security administration. However, it has already violated the law to check others for allegedly infringing their privacy rights. But whether you are published by the law depends on the specific circumstances.
There is no legal definition for stalking in the UK, and the criteria is that how it involves fear of violence or serious alarm or distress. So the maximum sentence is 10 years in custody, and if there is racial or religious information involved, then it will be a little bit higher for 14 years. So the key factor is that the accountability lies in the sophistication and the damages caused to the victims by these stalking events. However, if we look back for the cases that we use as examples, they were eventually charged with murder. That means that both offenders were never charged with any loss as mentioned in these pages. So for the Chinese victim, he was charged with murder and was sentenced to death. And for the UK offender, he was charged for murder and sentenced to 22 years in prison. So if we look into 22 years in prison and death penalty, so both of these penalties are much more serious than any of this listed here for 2 years or 3 years or even 10 years. And we can see that these stalking laws were not able to hold them accountable for their actions before it can worsen till precious lives were lost. Hence, we now move on to the difficulties to implement stalking laws.
If the victim reports to the Public Security Department, the local police may ask, but if there is no conclusive evidence, the stalker may not be published. At best, he will give a verbal warning. If the victim appears, he will be followed or harassed. But if the evidence is insufficient, the court will not accept it.
And for the case in the United Kingdom, just like with restraining orders, the behaviors that stalking laws aim to prevent are the very behavior prerequisite for these laws to take place. That means, ideally, there should be some sort of more mild stalking activities that victims can record and collect evidence to report to the police or other legal authorities so that they can catch the offenders at an earlier stage before precious lives are lost. But this is rarely the case because evidence are very hard to collect. Another research indicated that more than half stalking victims suffer psychologically from their experiences, but psychological experiences are very hard to get evidence from, as there is no standardized test to measure the types and degrees of psychological trauma. And this varies hugely from person to person due to their difference in background and education and many other factors. Henceforth, for both countries, China and the UK, these cases are very difficult to be proven in court and very difficult for legal authorities to intervene because of that.
So this is a discussion part. Discussion 1, how to prevent the stalking in the future. First, legal management of stalkers, anti-stalking registration or conjunction with the prosecuting agencies to apply for the training program into the legal institution, such as stalking risk profile, which is more aware of danger and the complicities of the stalking behaviors, and early police intervention or police information notice to provide some stalking risk profile to provide some information about the offender to prevent the stalking behavior, and the 5 stalker type which mentioned in the mirror research risk assessment tool to understand the personal circumstances. Discussion 2 is the program that tackles stalkers, which is the multi-agency stalking intervention program, which risk management intervention for the medium to high-risk stalking offenders. This program is support the detection, treatment, and prevention of stalking, and collaborate the partnership between health, social care, criminal justice agencies, and victim advocacy service, which improves offenders' problem solving and decision-making skill, self-regulation skill, and it also helps to understand stalking behavior considered as a criminal and with the coping mechanism. So the aims of each site want to be classification of the stalking cases, and which provides some response to the victim and provides some clinical intervention to the offenders willing to engage with the multi-agency stalking intervention program and to reduce their risk of reoffending. Discussion number 3 is therapeutic approach for the stalker and the victim. This is the theoretical behavior therapy, which called DDP. It is cognitive behavior management intervention and to teach people how to live in the moment, regulate emotion, and improve relationship, which kind of mainly 4 part, which is development of mindfulness skills, which live in the moment, concentrate to use feeling and the sensation, and it helps to calm down by healthy coping skill to avoid negative behavior. Second, distress tolerance, which is accept current situation by intense emotion and empower. Third, interpersonal effectiveness, which is improve the social skills to learn and listen and communication with others. Fourth, emotional regulation, which is help to identify, name, and change individuals' emotion and reduce individual emotion vulnerability and cope with the negative feeling. Discussion number 4 is a risk assessment for the stalking and the reoffense, which is the risk, need, and the responsibility model, which called RNR. It is address specific chronogenic dynamic risk factor to predict reoffending risk scale. There are 2 types of risk factors. One is the static risk factor, which is criminal history about the offenders and the offenders which age committed at the first offense. The second is the dynamic risk factors, which is kind of offenders accommodation and the employment status and education level and attitude. And this risk is referred to the intensity of treatment to match level of risk that an individual may pose to others of themselves. And treatment focused on the criminogenic needs because needs is directly related to the recidivism, such as substance of abuse and unemployment have been shown to be high in the stalking population should be targeted. And about the response is kind of the matching or most appropriate form of the treatment to the offender's characteristic and the high level of engagement, and considerable evidence has emphasized the importance for intervention to adhere arena principle to reduce the recidivism. So the internal response have some intellectual functioning, like such as self-esteem and some kind of offender's motivation level. And second is external response to find out the therapeutic relationship and kind of provide environmental support and program contents. So there are also these four kind of the intervention, and some have some limitation. The limitation which have some time commitment for offenders who are willing to attend the complete the task. Lack of and also have some lack of research or lack of expertise, because the stalking is the new type of the criminal behavior, so there was no specification of stalker type for the other case, and the limited support since treatment only operated by the mental health professionals, and also have high policing cost and high psychological cost, because when the setting the intervention or treatment program, which you spend a lot of financial cost, and also take for the psychological cost is kind of take for a long time to process the emotional treatment to the victim. And first is more reliant on the practitioner's memories, which could under or overestimate the time and the resources. Because it is the need to provide is complex or simple intervention, because high risk offenders should be multiple risk dimension, and the low to medium risk offenders should be with the straightforward resolution intervention. It will spend more time to process the risk management, and also if not have some professional information, it should be make the mistake for the profile the stalker type. So suggestion is more rigorous intervention to stalking behavior benefits. All agencies must be involved. Not only stalkers victims should be police and the court to manage the service and the cost. And also professional experts such as the forensic psychologists and the academic can conduct research and ensure the dissemination of information to provide some agencies related to preventing some criminal behavior and share the information together. So conclusion, stalking behavior comparison between mainland and the UK, and these both offenders have same as resentful and intimate stalkers, but the mainland offender is simpler and less time consuming about when before commit the crime, and United Kingdom offender is more complicated and more time consuming to commit the crime. There are different intervention and treatment for preventing stalking behavior. There's such a kind of limitation already mentioned in the past slide about psychological cost, physical cost, lack of research information, and the human resources, and also the offenders, how they are willing to participation in the assessment. So therefore, the general public, especially stalkers and past victims, should be trained for the risk assessment, and experts instruct to the clinicians, law enforcement agencies, and the judiciary, policymakers, and the general public agencies to involve together to preventing the stalking behavior. So this is our reference, and thank you for the presentation.